The cameras flashed around me like lightning in a storm. I stood center stage in a crisp, tailored suit with my silver hair pinned elegantly, my lips painted the bold red he'd always said was too much for someone your age. The screen behind me lit up with the logo of the hottest skincare brand in the country, his competitor. My face filled the frame, 20 feet high, smiling confidently. I could almost hear his jaw hitting the floor through the silence of the moment. He was there, in the front row, watching me accept an industry award for Brand Ambassador of the Year. He hadn't seen me in 5 years. Not since he got famous, not since he left his old life and his mother behind. He had built a name in beauty and wellness, riding on my shoulders, using everything I taught him growing up. And the moment he tasted recognition, he erased me from his world like I was just some faded childhood embarrassment. But tonight, all eyes were on me, not on him. And I didn't need his approval, his money, or his last name to get here. I smiled directly into the cameras and raised my trophy. To everyone who said I was too old to start over, thank you for the fuel. As the applause rose, I met his stunned stare across the hall. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. And I wasn't done haunting him yet. My name is Eleanor Walsh, and I'm 62 years old. I raised my only son, Daniel, on my own after his father walked out before his second birthday. I gave him everything: my time, my strength, my youth, and when his skincare company exploded into fame, I was proud beyond words. But as Daniel's fortune and following grew, so did the distance between us. He rebranded himself from humble roots into a glamorous, image-conscious celebrity who wanted nothing to do with the woman who raised him. One day, he simply stopped calling, stopped visiting, pretended I didn't exist. I was devastated, heartbroken, and humiliated. But I didn't waste away quietly. While he was busy ignoring me, I was building something of my own. And when the time came, I stood right in his spotlight, not to take what he had, but to show him what he'd thrown away. Now let me tell you how I got there. From the moment I first held Daniel in my arms, I knew my life was no longer mine. I was only 22 when I had him, and his father, well, he had dreams that didn't include late-night feedings or medical bills. He left us a month after Daniel's first birthday, leaving me with a tiny apartment, a stack of unpaid rent, and a son who needed the world from a mother who barely had a piece of it. But I made it work. I worked as a receptionist at a dermatology clinic in town, sometimes babysitting or cleaning houses on the weekends just to cover school uniforms and groceries. I learned how to stretch money until it frayed. And I made sure Daniel never saw any of it as a burden. He was a bright child, curious, creative, always watching. When he was 12, he used some leftover baking soda and tea tree oil from my pantry to treat his own acne, and I remember how his eyes lit up when it worked. From then on, his fascination with skincare became an obsession. He read labels at the pharmacy like most boys his age read comic books. I encouraged it. We didn't have much, but I let him experiment with homemade scrubs and serums, even when it meant our tiny kitchen smelled like vinegar for a week. Every birthday and Christmas, I gave him books on chemistry, skin biology, and even business. I believed in him, even when I didn't understand the formulas scribbled across his notebooks. When he was 16, Daniel began filming skincare tutorials in our bathroom using my old flip phone propped up on stacked towels. His charm was magnetic, funny, sweet, disarmingly sincere. People started watching, then subscribing. I watched his subscriber count grow from hundreds to thousands. By the time he was 20, he had millions of fans and a small, but fast-growing skincare brand he'd named Purolite. He moved to Los Angeles on a business opportunity, promising to fly me out to visit once things settled. I remember standing on the front porch of our house with my arms crossed over my apron, waving goodbye with both pride and an ache I couldn't place. I didn't know then that it would be the last time he visited as my son. In the beginning, he still called, though less often. He told me about his office, the brand deals, the influencers he was meeting. I watched his success unfold online like everyone else, liking his posts and leaving comments that usually went unanswered. At first, I thought he was just busy. But when I tried to send him a birthday card and it was returned unopened, I knew something had shifted. I reached out again. And again. Emails. Voicemails. Nothing. Then I saw a feature in a glossy magazine where he described his background as a modest suburban childhood and credited a mentor, not his mother, for supporting his early experiments. The way he spoke of his life erased me, as though I'd never existed. I was stunned. I cried, of course, I won't lie about that. But more than anything, I felt invisible, unworthy, cast aside like a torn-up recipe from a worn-out woman who didn't fit into his luxury narrative. But I wasn't weak. I hadn't survived life on my own just to be discarded when he no longer found me convenient. I picked myself up. I stopped watching his interviews. I started walking again, cooking new meals, and taking long baths in silence. Then something happened that changed everything. I was browsing a local market one morning when I struck up a conversation with a vendor selling handmade soap. She mentioned needing help managing orders online. One thing led to another, and before long, I was helping her build a little storefront from her garage. Her name was Grace, and she reminded me a lot of Daniel in the early days, eager, hopeful, and full of ideas. Soon, Grace introduced me to a few other women in town who were trying to make their own beauty and wellness products, but lacked the business skills. I helped them organize, streamline, and dream a little bigger. I had no formal training, but decades of scraping by had made me resourceful and clear-eyed. One night, as I looked at their products, natural oils, handmade creams, zero-waste packaging, it hit me. There was something here. Something real. Something Daniel had long since abandoned in his quest for glamour and glitz. So I gathered them, 5 women in total, all over 50, all overlooked by the beauty industry, and we formed our own collective. We called it Second Nature. Our motto? Beauty earned and honest. I poured everything into it. My energy, my time, my soul. We launched with just 5 products, each one named after a woman who had been told she was too old, too plain, or too irrelevant to be beautiful. I didn't do it to compete with Daniel. At least not at first. But once Second Nature started gaining traction online, I saw the comments. Finally, skincare made by women who get it. Purolite is for kids, this is the real deal. And then one day, a post went viral. A beauty influencer in her 50s raved about our serum and called out Daniel's brand as superficial fluff built on vanity. That's when I realized something extraordinary was happening. Without meaning to, I was becoming the face of an alternative movement, one that directly challenged everything my son had built. And that's when I knew. He'd forgotten me. But the world was about to remember. The moment everything changed came quietly, almost casually. It was a Tuesday morning. I was watering the lavender on my back porch, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug, when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a mention on social media. Someone had tagged Second Nature in a video. Curious, I clicked it open and watched a young beauty influencer, bright-eyed, energetic, praising our products. But that wasn't what stopped my breath. The next frame cut to a side-by-side comparison of Second Nature's bestseller with Purolite's Radiance Complex. "Let's talk about honesty and beauty," the influencer said, her tone sharp. Second Nature, created by women over 50, is transparent, ethical, and sustainable. Meanwhile, Purolite claims to be innovative, but has questionable ingredient sourcing and no acknowledgement of its actual roots. Then the real blow landed. Fun fact, the founder of Purolite, Daniel Cray, hasn't spoken to the mother who raised him. Guess what? She's the face behind Second Nature. I stood frozen, coffee cooling in my hand, as the video ended. My heart pounded not with shame, but with rage. Not at the influencer. Not even at the world for only now realizing what I'd known for years. I was furious at Daniel. He hadn't just forgotten me. He'd actively buried me. scrubbed me from his story like an old stain that didn't match his brand's aesthetic. And now, without even trying, I had re-emerged publicly. And people were talking. The video picked up steam. It got reposted, duet, stitched with reactions. Women shared their own stories about being overlooked, dismissed, rewritten. The phrase second nature over Purolite started trending on niche forums. Even our modest sales numbers began to surge. 3 days later, I got an email from a well-known beauty publication requesting an interview. "Your journey has inspired thousands," the editor wrote. "We'd love to feature your story as part of our Real Women Behind Real Brand series." I hesitated. I hadn't built second nature to chase fame. I didn't want a spotlight, I wanted dignity. Still, part of me knew what this meant. If I accepted, I would no longer be just a quiet challenge to Daniel's empire. I would be a direct threat. That same night, I got a message from an unfamiliar number. "Mom, we need to talk. Please." I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering. The word mom rang hollow now. After 5 years of silence, after building his brand on a fiction that erased me, he wanted to talk? I didn't reply. Instead, I did the interview. I told my story, not with bitterness, but with truth. I spoke of the long nights, the cleaning jobs, the soap-making women who had come together to build something meaningful. I spoke of resilience, reinvention, and the beauty of aging into strength. The article went viral. That week, Second Nature received over 40,000 new orders. We had to pause international shipping just to keep up. Emails poured in, some from customers, some from women thanking us for showing them that life didn't end at 50. And then the real storm hit. A former Purolite employee reached out to me anonymously. She shared that Daniel's brand was scrambling. They'd begun damage control, issuing soft denials, claiming I had no connection to the business. But it was too late. Screenshots from old social media posts where I was credited as his first inspiration started circulating. People were asking questions he couldn't afford to answer. The final twist came in the form of a leaked memo from Purolite's PR team. It outlined plans to counter the maternal narrative and reposition Daniel as a self-made innovator untethered from outdated sentimentality. Outdated sentimentality. I reread that line until the words blurred. That's what I was to him now, a narrative problem. An inconvenience. That night, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The same space where, years ago, Daniel had filmed his first skincare video on my cracked phone. I saw the lines on my face, the silver in my hair. But I didn't see something to hide. I saw something earned. And that's when I decided I wouldn't just let this happen. I would finish what he started, but I would do it my way. No pretense. No fabrication. No forgetting. Because he might have erased me. But I was about to become unforgettable. After the article was published and began circulating widely, Second Nature's sales tripled. My inbox was a constant hum: interviews, collaborations, invitations to panels and podcasts. Women who had once hesitated to share their age online were now proudly tagging our products with phrases like "beauty at 60" or "my second bloom." And amidst it all, Daniel was uncomfortably silent. Until one morning, a new campaign from Purolite appeared on every major platform. It was sleek, overproduced, and clearly rushed. Their latest serum promised rebirth, and the spokesperson, an actress in her early 20s, told a glossy tale of independence, strength, and building a future by shedding the past. I knew what Daniel was doing. He wasn't speaking to me directly. He didn't have to. The campaign was a deliberate contrast, one that suggested aging was something to conquer, not embrace. Where I had leaned into transparency and time, he was doubling down on erasure and youth. The comments under the Purolite ads were brutal. "Where's your real founder now, Daniel? Didn't your mom create half those formulas? Second Nature is aging with grace. You're just aging your lies." It wasn't just online backlash. Influencers began publicly switching loyalties. A major skincare review site placed Second Nature's Renewal Balm at number 1, while Purolite dropped to 8th place. Independent chemists began questioning ingredient transparency in Purolite's newer lines. But the tipping point came when a retired editor from a legacy beauty magazine shared a blog post. "I know the woman Daniel forgot. She told of meeting me a decade ago. Described my kindness, my generosity with knowledge. How Daniel once bragged about learning everything from his mom before he became too big to mention me." Suddenly, it wasn't just a feud. It was a reckoning. Daniel finally reached out again, not through a text, but via a formal letter delivered to Second Nature's small storefront. The tone was cold, legal, and not from him directly. Purolite respectfully demands that you cease associating yourself publicly with their brand or its origins, it read. The letter accused me of defamation. Said I was misrepresenting my role in his success. Claimed I had never been involved in the product development process and that my public statements were damaging the integrity of the Purolite narrative. I sat at my kitchen table holding that letter, the sunlight falling across the words as though trying to burn them away. Integrity? He had stood on my back to build his house and now wanted to kick dirt over the foundation. I handed the letter to my lawyer, a woman named Dina I had met at one of our early women-led business conferences. She laughed dryly and said, "If he wants to open this door, let's walk through it." That week, we posted a simple statement on Second Nature's website. It included photographs of my original skincare journals, ingredient trials Daniel and I had done together, and early packaging mock-ups with his handwriting and mine side by side. Nothing aggressive, just facts. Tangible proof that I had helped him take his first steps. We also shared an open letter. I am not trying to take what isn't mine. I'm reclaiming what I gave freely and what was never meant to be hidden. The response was explosive. News outlets picked up the story. The phrase "skincare's forgotten mother" trended across platforms. Daniel's attempts to silence me only amplified my voice. Even some of his board members began to speak anonymously to journalists, revealing that internal meetings had become tense. Sales of Purolite's latest launch had underperformed by 60%. Daniel had made me into a ghost. But now that ghost was haunting him in public. As Daniel's PR team scrambled, I kept building. I didn't waste time gloating or calling him out by name. I invested in our customers, shared behind-the-scenes stories, interviewed our formulator, spotlighted older creators and artisans. Second Nature was growing not because of drama, but because we'd earned trust. Still, part of me waited. Wondered when the next punch would come. It arrived in the form of a documentary. An independent filmmaker, intrigued by the mother-son business rift, had started digging deeper. She contacted me for an interview. At first, I hesitated, but something about her approach felt right. She wasn't chasing gossip. She was chasing truth. The film, Beauty Behind the Curtain, premiered at a small festival. It was raw, intimate, and honest. I spoke candidly not just about Daniel, but about being overlooked, rebuilding after loss, and why women over 50 deserve to be seen. But the documentary also featured others. The former employee who'd leaked the Purolite memo, an early investor who'd quietly been pushed out, and even an old video of Daniel as a teenager, excitedly thanking me for teaching him about botanicals. When the film went viral, it was no longer about Cassandra Cray. It was about every woman who had been erased, every contribution that had been minimized for someone else's brand. Purolite's stock dipped. A major distributor pulled out of a deal. And then came the final blow. A whistleblower leaked internal emails showing Daniel had knowingly crafted a false founder narrative to appeal to a younger demographic, despite knowing I was the one who had conceptualized his earliest formulations. Purolite's legal team tried damage control. But public trust had cracked, and in the beauty world, trust is everything. Meanwhile, Second Nature was acquired by a women-led wellness conglomerate with a clause that guaranteed I'd remain its figurehead and product advisor for life. I didn't set out to destroy my son's business. But in trying to erase me, he made me impossible to ignore. The day I saw Daniel at the Beauty Industry Summit was the day I understood my revenge had already happened. He hadn't known I'd be there. The summit, hosted in Los Angeles, was headlined by the most influential brands and thought leaders in the skincare and wellness space. Second Nature had earned its place on that stage, not through drama, but through authenticity. We were opening the second day with a keynote titled, Legacy and Reinvention, When the Past Fuels the Future. I stood behind the curtain, mic clipped to my collar, watching through a gap as Daniel took his seat near the back of the ballroom. His face was thinner than I remembered, drawn and stiff. There was no entourage around him, no cameras, no one ushering him forward. For the first time in a decade, my son looked small. When I stepped onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. Not for my name, not for revenge, but for resilience. I took a breath and began. I didn't speak about Daniel. I didn't speak to him. I spoke about mothers who are asked to step aside so their children can shine, about being invisible in rooms they helped build, and about how power doesn't always come with a title, but with memory, with truth. Then I told the audience about the women who'd sent letters after the documentary aired. The ones who'd said, "You reminded me of who I used to be." That was the real revenge. Not headlines. Not a public reckoning. It was in becoming what Daniel had tried to erase, only brighter, bigger, and impossible to ignore. After the panel, people rushed forward. Some wanted photos. Others wanted advice. But I noticed Daniel still seated, unmoving. A few industry heads approached him cautiously, with awkward smiles. One of them patted his shoulder, said something I couldn't hear. He nodded slowly and looked down at his hands. That night, in my hotel suite, a knock came at the door. It was Daniel. He looked tired, older than his years. A man who had been forced to look at himself in the mirror and finally see the cracks. I let him in. He didn't speak for a long while. Just stood there, eyes darting from the floor to the framed art on the walls, to the untouched tea tray on the table. Then he said, quietly, I didn't think it would matter. I asked, what? Erasing me? No, he replied. That it would hurt you so much. I thought, you were done with all of it. I watched him for a moment, unsure whether he wanted forgiveness or absolution. He wasn't crying, but his voice had that hollow sound, the kind that follows deep regret. I'm not here to punish you, I said. You did that all on your own. He nodded slowly. I know. I saw the documentary. The letters. Everything. You did what I never could. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He stood, hands in his pockets, then turned toward the door. If you ever want to talk, outside of all this, he said, gesturing vaguely at the space between us, I'd like to try. I let him walk away. Revenge wasn't about reuniting or repairing. It wasn't even about justice anymore. It was about finally being seen, owning my name, my work, my story, and he couldn't take that from me again. A week later, Purolite issued a formal apology to its customers. Daniel stepped down as CEO and was replaced by a woman who had built her own brand from scratch. Their rebranding focused on transparency, giving credit to contributors and rebuilding community trust. Meanwhile, Second Nature launched an initiative for women over 50 to start their own businesses with microgrants and mentorship support. We called it First Light. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel had tried to become the face of a movement I had started in silence. And now I had become the voice of something far greater. Not in his shadow, but in my own light. Now, when I walk into a room, people don't see someone's mother or someone's ex or someone's ghost from the past. They see Cassandra Monroe, founder, speaker, mentor, a woman who was quietly shoved aside, only to return with a power no one could contain. I no longer measure my worth by how many people applaud. I measure it in the quiet moments when a younger woman emails me to say she saw herself in my journey, or when a grandmother stands up at one of our workshops and says, "It's not too late for me, is it?" And I get to look her in the eye and say, "Absolutely not." My relationship with Daniel remains distant. He's reached out a few times. Polite messages. Hesitant invitations. I've responded once or twice. Not out of bitterness, but because I no longer need anything from him. Not his love. Not his approval. And certainly not his validation. He made his choices. And I made mine. Second Nature continues to grow, not just as a brand, but as a movement. We've opened a small training center in my hometown, right where I used to volunteer at the community health center. There's a quote painted in big letters across the main wall, words I carry with me every day. You don't get to decide how people remember you, but you can decide what you leave behind. I left behind pain, betrayal, and silence. And in its place, I built something that speaks. If you had told me 5 years ago that I'd be standing where I am now, I would have laughed. I thought my best years were behind me. I thought being a mother meant giving up my voice. I thought being forgotten was part of growing older. But I was wrong. I had to lose everything, my son, my peace, even my name, before I could reclaim the woman I was always meant to be. Now I ask you, as someone who's walked through the fire and come out the other side, what would you do if the world forgot your worth? Would you shrink into the silence? Or would you rise and remind them who you are? Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't shouting back. It's standing tall, and never needing to speak at all.